Well, today we are off to the Salvington Mill, High Salvington Windmill, and with me is good old Jimmy.
Oh yes, I'm here. 320 feet above sea level, I think we are.
Are we? And George is here.
Hello.
Hello. So we're going to have a little look at this old post mill.
Dated, what's the date of this? 17... I've forgotten already. 1780 or something.
Yes,
Standing 320 feet above sea level and commanding a fine view over Worthing and the sea stands the Black Post Mill at High Salvington. It's the last remaining mill to serve the Worthing area and still stands defiantly against the elements. An earlier mill existed on this site in 1615, but this mill, still with its original post, was built around 1750.
So it's a beautiful windmill made of wood, black wood. I assume that's some form of creosote, some sort of wood protection. Beautifully restored with magnificent sails. Okay, and it's only £1 to come in. There's a chap there handing out special tickets. I don't know what that's for.
Right, we'll have to have one of those.
Perhaps he's going to give us a talk.
I think perhaps they tie children to the sail as it goes round.
George, do you fancy being tied to the sail?
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Two adults, and Georgie comes in for nothing, is that right?
Yes, children,
Yes,
nothing.
that's lovely.
Aren't you
Thanks
nice?
very much.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Joining the party for a tour?
Oh, yes, please.
All right, there you go.
We're recording, is that,
Hang on
is
to
that all right?
That's all right.
Just sound.
Sure, Ray won't mind.
That would be great.
Oh, lovely, thank you.
Oh, and the sun.
Interesting that it's got two of the sails are wooden slats, and the other two are sheets of canvas.
Yes, it actually, I was looking at the pictures, and it shows a lot of windmills without the canvas on, where you can just see the
wooden
wood.
slats, which they tilt to catch the wind.
And actually, now that we are up close, it's the first time I've appreciated that the sails dip in and out.
Yeah, that's true.
Shall we have a look round the outside first?
please.
Oh, lovely.
Okay. Let's come over here then.
Since ancient times, man has harnessed the power of the wind to provide motive power for transportation. Likewise, the technique of grinding grain between stones to produce flour is similarly ancient and widespread. Quite where and when these two came together in the first windmill is unknown, but a likely scenario suggests a Persian origin, from where, tradition has it, the knowledge spread back into northern Europe as a result of the Crusades. European millwrights became highly skilled craftsmen, developing the technology tremendously, and as Europeans set off colonising the rest of the globe, windmills spread throughout the world.
First of all, looking at the sails, or the sweeps as we call them, this mill, we're quite proud of our mill because it's a Rolls-Royce mill. It's got two types of sweep. It's got the common sweep, which is covered with the sailcloth, and it's moulded so that it takes the shape of a sail on a ship or on a yacht. And it's got shutters. The other two are shutter sails. Now they're sprung loaded from the two black springs, the semi-elliptic springs that you can see up in the centre there. So the idea is you want a nice steady turn about the sails. If you get a sudden gust of wind, then the sails will whip round suddenly, causing the stones to equally go round suddenly, and they could cause a spark. So with the aid of shutters, which are sprung loaded, As the wind builds up and suddenly forces itself onto the sail, the shutters would open, allow the wind to spill through, and the sails keep going at the same speed. And when the wind dies down, the shutters will shut again and take up the power and carry on driving the sails around. So there's two types of sail. Some windmills have got 4 sets of shutters. They're the real top notch. Very expensive, but we're quite proud to have just 2 and 2. The common sail, normally you would have had a windmill with just 4 common sails. Now if we come round further, see that you've got the sails in the front, then you've got the body of the windmill, the black body, and immediately diametrically opposite the sails you've got the steps. And the steps are there for 3 reasons. First, to obviously give you access in and out of the mill. Secondly, it helps to keep the windmill upright, because without the steps there, all the time the mill is facing into the wind, you can have one hell of a force acting on the centre spindle, and that force can quite easily blow the windmill over. But with the steps there, the steps help to keep the windmill upright. Thirdly, you can see the white pole that sticks out from the windmill.
Yes, I know that.
That's the pole that you push the windmill round, because the windmill must always face into the wind. So before you can push the windmill round, you've got to lift the steps up, and the steps act as an anchor.
What would happen if it wasn't facing the wind?
If it wasn't, if it was the opposite way round and the wind was behind the sails, it could quite easily blow the windmill over.
So the miller's got to be constantly aware,
or somebody's got to be constantly aware of the weather forecast, and generally the wind comes from the southwest. Generally, so it's usually facing southwest. But today, for some, it's blowing from the northwest. So we've had to turn, and in a moment we'll turn the windmill round just to let you see how the miller's daughter, it was her job to ensure that the mill was always facing into the wind.
Evidence of windmills in England dates from the 12th century, with earlier references to mills, such as the 11th century Domesday Book, generally held to be talking about either animal or water-powered mills. The 14th and 15th centuries provide evidence of what the early mills looked like, with illustrations occurring in diverse media such as memorial brasses, stained glass and wood carvings, as well as the expected manuscript records. These early illustrations all show the simple, all-wooden post-mill structure, typified by the elegant and beautifully restored High Salvington Black Mill.
Where our little hut is over there now, that's new, but that site used to be where the miller's cottage stood. And there was a flint and brick cottage with, there was 1 bedroom, a living room, scullery and kitchen, and the toilet was down the bottom of the site, little privy down there. And the miller's daughter, we've got records of every miller right from day one in 1700 right up to the present day, and every miller had a daughter. Incredible. And it was her job. She worked for Dad. She worked for Dad, and it was her job to look out of the windows, look at the flag that was flying from the chimney pot, and if the wind changed direction, she would have to come down and move the windmill round to face into the wind. So we'll go around and we'll move the windmill.
If I'm right in reading, this thing weighs 40 tonnes.
34.
34 tonnes.
34 tonnes. Yeah.
All pivoted on one post.
All pivoted on one spot. Yeah, you may be right, 40 tonnes with the rest of the windmill, but the actual windmill itself weighs 34 tonnes. Now, we'll move, before you can move the windmill, you've got to lift up the anchor, so the steps act as an anchor to keep it generally facing into the wind. So first of all, we lift up the steps. Now they're beginning to feel a bit sick upstairs. Right, you kids, come over here, please. Come on then. That's it, go on in. Push.
Can you have my...
Right, get the other side. And right, push it back, come this side, push it back. That'll do. There's only two types of windmill. You can either have a post mill, which this is, or you can have a tower mill. And the tower mill is where you have a fixed tower, and the cap which sits on the top of the tower, where all the machinery is in, is the cap which rotates.
Post mills are so named because of the large upright post on which the mill's main structure, the body, is balanced. By mounting the body this way, the mill is able to rotate to face the variable wind direction. To maintain the upright post, a structure consisting of horizontal cross trees and angled quarter bars is used. By far the most common arrangement was 2 crossbars at right angles to each other under the base of the post, together with 4 quarter bars. Initially, the cross trees would have rested directly on the ground, but since this makes them very susceptible to rotting, the cross trees were soon being placed on brick piers to raise them off the ground.
Let's have a look inside of in the roundhouse. Now, today is National Mills Day, and there's a radio hands are inside. They're trying to contact all the mills in the country. So they're in there with their headphones on and twiddling knobs, and they have in fact got there's a blackboard in there where they've contacted various mills. So if we can just keep quiet a little bit, and then we can hear what they're doing as well. Okay, well, you heard me say that it was a post mill, and here is the post. Now that is original, and it's the mill was built in 1700, so that's 300 years old. And to grow to that size in one oak tree must have taken 250 years at least. So that post is at least 550 years old. It's absolutely solid. We've had to chisel out bits down the bottom to repair it and scarf bits in. And it was so hard that when we hit it 3 times with a hammer and with a mallet and chisel, 3 hits and the chisel was blunt. So that oak is really rock hard. It does not sit on the ground. There's about a 4-inch gap underneath the bottom of the oak tree. It sits in, if that's the post, it sits in the cross tree. There's a cross which goes across there, and the cross tree sits in there, and all that does is to prevent it from waggling about like that in the breeze.
The oak post on which the mill rotates is 21 foot 6 inches high. The foot of the post is actually several inches clear of the ground. The colossal weight of the mill is taken through the diagonal quarter bars and on the horizontal cross trees of the trestle. The obvious improvement to the early post mill was to build a roundhouse up around the cross trees and quarter bar structure. This made the structure a lot more protected from the weather and provided additional storage space.
We had to renew these, and they came from a lace-making factory in Nottingham that was being pulled down. One moment there was the big ball and chain bashing into the building, and all the brick rubble was going up one end, and all the wood was going up the other end, ready to be set fire, have a big massive bonfire. And when one of our chaps saw this timber going on to a bonfire, he said, hang on, you know, we could do with that wood down in Worthing for our windmill. And the moment he said we could possibly buy it off of you, all they could then see was the pound sign in the front of their eyes. 1 minute it's going to be burnt, the next minute we had to pay $2,500 for this timber to be shipped down from Nottingham down to Worthing to be used on our mill. This one we know from records was built in 1700, but we have on record the miller's daughter getting married to somebody, to a chappie in Tarring Church. You know, the church with the steeple that's on a cock, and the record states that the miller's daughter was of High Salvington Mill, and the wedding was dated 1658. So there was a mill on this site in 1658. Right, well, if we go outside, we'll go upstairs. Someone asked me earlier on as we were outside here of the weight of the actual windmill. Well, sitting on top of that post is the black body of the windmill, and the weight of that is about 34 tonne. So that's sitting on top of the post, and 34 tonne turns about that point on the top of the post.
So I suppose the farmers must have brought all their grain.
The mill owner, I suppose, he just owned the mill, and the farmers brought their grain up and paid him a certain fee to mill their grain. Yeah. You notice on that little house over there,
little granary,
how it's off the ground.
Yes.
That's to stop rats getting up. Those little piers.
When I was a kid, down the back of our house there was a farm, and it had a huge barn all on those little toadstools.
That's it,
concrete toadstools.
Yeah. You look at those, go, what on earth are those? But they do serve a good purpose.
And then we had this preservation society come along, and they started pulling it down, and they took it, and I believe it's at Singleton Open Air Museum.
Oh, that's a great place to go.
Well, I don't know if Robert has one.
Why is it called a buck? The main body of it is called a buck. B-U-C-K?
Yes. That's at the top of the post, the buck. And that's where the old saying comes from, the buck stops here.
Oh, really? Oh, excellent. You couldn't go beyond, could you?
Can't go beyond the buck.
Of course, there's only one way in and one way out, isn't there?
Yes. I know, so everyone has to come out backwards because the steps are actually quite steep.
The steps are very steep, aren't they? So the height of the first floor is what, 20 foot? No, 15 foot up.
15 from the base.
From the base.
We're on there's a sort of donut ridge of earth that runs around the outside of the building, and then it sinks down into the main base.
Right, James, would you like to follow me?
Oh, we're off.
Right, we're now about to increase the weight of this windmill. Thank you kindly.
I think it might just cope with us, but not with Georgie, because Georgie is obviously very heavy. As we go up these steep steps, 15 foot into the first floor. Oh wow, isn't this impressive?
The windmill was introduced into England in the 12th century, probably by crusaders returning from the wars in the Holy Land. To be effective, the mill needed the wind to blow toward the sails. As the wind often changes direction, it was necessary to be able to face the sails into the wind so that the mill could work. To make this possible, the mill body was made to rest upon an upright post. A long lever projecting from the rear of the mill body allowed it to be turned around. Mills of this type are called post mills.
Almost like being on a ship, isn't it?
It is, isn't it?
It is very much like being on a ship. And in fact, on windy nights, when chaps are working up here, and it's rocking
around,
and right up, if you're right up the top, after about half an hour, you do feel seasick.
Yes, with seagulls going round, the whole illusion is there, isn't it?
Can we come away from the door, please, so that the other party can go down? Okay, well now, when we were downstairs in the roundhouse, we saw the post, and here's the post here again. It stops there, and sitting on top of the post is a cast iron pad with a cup in it, and there's a cannonball sitting in the cup. Then there's a cast iron plate on the top of that, which sits underneath this lump of oak, which goes right the way across there, and that lump of oak is called the crown tree. And on that lump of oak is built the entire windmill. Everything is balanced on that piece of wood there.
And what's that?
That is called the buck. And as I said downstairs, that's where the old saying comes from, the buck stops here. It's greased with tallow. There's a hole drilled right through this lump of oak, and you can see some of the tallow there which is dripped out.
What is tallow?
It's animal fat. It's like lard.
Oh right.
That's what the candles used to be made out of.
Yeah. And there's a hole drilled through, and we heat up the tallow until it's very liquid, and then we pour it through the hole, and it comes down onto the bearing there. But I mean, it's not much. One application lasts about 2 years. I mean, the windmill doesn't go very fast.
No.
As it goes round.
Is that what they would have traditionally used?
That's traditional, yes. Now, again, we say that this is like a Rolls-Royce windmill because we've got two stones. If you look up, you can see the underside of the two stones.
Yes.
There's the tail stone and the breast stone. There's the breast stone up there. The breast stone is just over 6 foot diameter, and the tail stone is just under 4 foot diameter. The breast stone needs a really good wind to turn the sails, to turn the breast stone. And if you're using the breast stone, you can grind about 100 weight of wheat per hour.
Wow.
Without the wind, if the wind drops but it's still blowing, you can disengage the breast stone and engage the tail stone. Now the tail stone, being smaller diameter, don't need quite so much wind to turn it. But the compromise is that you only grind about 40 pounds worth weight of wheat per hour, as against 100 weight with the breast stone. So it was a case, as far as the miller was concerned: no wind, no grinding, no flour, empty tummies.
No income.
No income. So if the wind was blowing at midnight, he would come out of his little cottage and grind some wheat. This floor is called the spout floor because here are the spouts from the two stones. So the flour, when you're grinding, you lift up the little trap hatch and put the sack or the bag underneath and collect the flour as it comes down through the. As the top stone goes round, there's a brush attached to the side of the stone, and it brushes the flour around with it, and it gradually comes over a hole in the floor and down the spout.
Wind power was also used to raise water. The earliest water-raising mills operated scoop wheels. A scoop wheel had a lift which was less than its radius. Many mills of this kind were used by Dutch engineers when they drained the fens in the 17th century. There were hundreds of drainage mills in various parts of England, but most were in Suffolk or Norfolk.
A lot of others. We've got this gadget here, which is called a governor. Now, I said outside that we've got the shutter sails. But again, you can still have a sudden gust of wind and the shutters don't open quick enough and you get a sudden turn of the top stone, and flour is an explosive. A lot of people don't realise that, but it is an explosive. And if the sudden gust of wind causes the stone to suddenly turn that much sharper, you could create a spark, and bingo, you've got an explosion, you've got a fire, and that is why so many wooden windmills burnt down.
Oh, yes.
So we've got a gadget here, so that it's attached to the spindle which is driving the top stone. So the belts drive as the spindle is going. There's the spindle up there, which is sitting on this lump of wood here in a bearing. As the wind is driving the top stone, this spindle is driving this belt, which drives this pulley here. As it spins round, these weights get flung outwards through centrifugal force, and as they get flung outwards, it lifts this bar. You can see this bar here going up. Okay, so when this goes up about 2 inches, by the time it gets over to this side of the mill over here, it lifts this bar up about 1/4 of an inch, which in turn lifts this one about this point here, about 1/8 of an inch, which by the time it gets here, pushes that spindle up twice the thickness of one of our hairs, about 2.5 thousandths of an inch. That is sufficient to lift the stone up and to prevent it touching and causing a spark.
Simple, isn't it?
Simple. And yet they knew this method in 1700 and before. They were very clever people, the people who made windmills.